Hey everybody, welcome to the theory portion of the Shag haircut. So as we can see, the Shag is a fully layered haircut with a perimeter that continues all the way around that includes the bang. And it's the foundation of many of the layered haircuts that we see happening right now. So there's a couple things that we want to talk about before we get into the Shag. One thing is we're going to be using some consistent elevation in this, and what we want to do is try to use rolling hands as much as possible, meaning keeping our hands up and bringing the hair to us as often as we can without dropping the hair completely. The second thing is we want to talk about, when we talk about the perimeter of the Shag, the perimeter includes the bang line. So even though we're cutting the bang line as a separate entity to create a guide for part of the rest of the haircut, it is part of the whole haircut. It's not actually a separate bang. As you can see, it moves into the rest of the haircut. And the last thing we want to talk about is the bang length, because we want to suggest that this is at least mid-length of the cheekbone or shorter. If it's too long, the haircut isn't going to take on the look of a Shag or a fully layered haircut. And if it's too short, you'll cut the top of the hair too short and it will change the shape of the haircut as well. So we really want to look at this mid-cheek or shorter area kind of between the eye and the cheek, just for reference point to keep the shape on target. Okay, well, there's a couple different textures of hair they want to talk about as well. So the 5 pillars of the haircut are going to come into play here. First, the density. This is going to look best on normal to thick hair. Very sparse hair may have a hard time holding up the shape to see the fullness of the haircut. The wave pattern you're going to want to look at is textured, curly, wavy. Straight hair is going to require some styling or some texture created into it to show the haircut off, and stick straight hair is going to have a hard time showing off this shape. The strands that we want to use are going to be either medium or coarse. Again, fine hair, you can do this haircut on fine hair, but it's not going to have the same impact as it would have with fine or coarse or medium or coarse hair. And then the length is more to mid-length or bob length. Once you get really long, it's very difficult to create a fluid line from way up here to way down here and make all of that come into play and connect well together. You might find that one of our other haircuts does that really well. And then of course take into consideration any growth patterns. If your client has a really strong part on one side of the head, maybe you want to adjust the haircut in the front so that it flows nicely from that side. Or if there's some really strong growth patterns or colics toward the back of the hair, keep in mind maybe leaving enough length to work with that properly so we don't get separations where we don't want them. Okay, let's get into how to do this. So the first step is we're going to cut the perimeter length of the haircut. So that's going to be on the very bottom line of the hair. So if you can see in our diagram here, this is the area where we're taking the perimeter length. Everything's going to be down to 1 point. We want to establish a section that combines the front and the top of the head below the round of the head, and finish sectioning the rest of the head into the 12 panels with the crown and align it with the front. So we can see on the chart here that we have divided the head into our side panel, our parietal, our nape, our crown, and our top. The Shag ultimately is going to create a buildup of weight in this area to create more of a convex shape, meaning that there's going to be some roundness within this area just below the top of the head, and then create a concave shape or an area that kind of sinks in and takes the weight away in the profile. And you can see that this is a bit rounder here, and then it comes in and you have this longer area in the back. So the shape becomes a bit more skinny, if you will, toward the bottom. And so we like to use concave and convex as a way to describe the overall result of this haircut. Convex, again, creating more roundness, and then concave creating more scooping in or taking away weight from the silhouette of the haircut. When we elevate the hair in a cutting line that is parallel to the ground, it's considered horizontal cutting line and horizontal elevation, and we'll be using both of those as we cut the Shag. So because we're working with both concave and convex shapes in our silhouette, we need to understand how to create them. So within the Shag, a concave result is desired by holding the hair horizontally and elevating it over 90 degrees. And when we want a convex result, we're holding the hair horizontally and holding it and cutting it below 90 degrees. So now that we've established steps 1 and 2, we're going to start cutting at the front of the front of the head. So we're positioning face to face with the client, and we're taking a panel horizontally that combines the front plane, creating a guide, and elevating it to the height of the panel and the point of the cutting line that we're working with. So what we're doing is if we look at this section here, we're holding our first panel of hair straight out from the head to create our guide in the very front. And then each consecutive section is slightly elevated and taken to that same line, this same vertical line. These sections are held horizontally, gradually elevated up to our final point here. Because this is all below 90 degrees, it's going to create a nice convex shape around the face. So we're going to continue cutting horizontal panels, slightly elevating each one as we finish up the front. Then we're going to connect the front panel to the nape corner, and we're going to wet slide outside the fan grip. So on the side of the head, if we look here in this side panel, this section here is going to be matched to what we've cut here and what we've cut here in the nape. And we're going to take our scissors and slide cut that, starting with our guide in the front, moving to our guide in the nape. We can also see this on the side here. We've established our bang length, which is part of our perimeter, and we're cutting this from our guide from our bang length to our guide and our nape length. And we're going to connect those two on the side. Those sections are combed slightly forward as we cut front to back. And you can see the line that this creates, a curved line moving front to back. So now we're going to position ourselves behind the client and continue to cut horizontal panels from the front. We're working in the crown now. So we're going to work from the top of the head down. We're starting here. We're creating our new guide. So I've taken a section that we finished up on the top of the head. I've combed it straight up vertically at 180 degrees at the top of the head and established a new guide using this as the front section as my guide. I'm gradually dropping my elevation as I work down the crown. So we're starting at the top, taking horizontal sections across the crown and gradually working down. This helps to create this roundness or this convex shape in the back of the head at the crown, leaving a nice round fullness right here at about mid-cheek where we've established our bang length. We can also see this in this diagram here. This section across the top of the head is where we've established the front and the crown. The crown is all brought to the previous section with horizontal sections moving slightly down as we move down the crown. The next step is going to be working in the parietal. So that's in the back part of the head right underneath the crown. That entire section established right here is going to be combed up to the bottom section of the crown. That is our guide for the parietal. So the last section we cut here at the crown becomes the guide for the entire parietal section. Depending upon the density of the hair, you can break this down into smaller panels, or you can take one large panel. Taking one large panel can be a little bit tricky because if you take too much hair, your texture can change and the result of the haircut will change. Suggested would be to take this into a couple of panels based upon the density of the hair. But regardless, all of it gets elevated horizontally to the very bottom of the crown, and that's how we establish our parietal. This is going to start creating somewhat of a convex or concave area in the back of the head. So when this comes down, it will curve in and take away weight. Just as we can see in the back of the shag here, as it slightly comes in and everything begins to get a little bit more skinny. The last thing we have to do here is double check that both sides under large panels are horizontal elevation. The next step, in the nape section, we're going to connect what's left over to the parietal. So you can take sections in the nape and comb them up to the parietal and see if there's any hair that extends beyond the guideline in the parietal. If there is, you can take your shear and cut gently from your guide at the bottom of the parietal all the way to the tip of your actual perimeter length. Do not cut beyond that perimeter length or you'll lose the perimeter that you've created before. After you're done connecting the nape to the parietal, if necessary, the last thing you're going to do is do a quick star check on the top of your head. And all we're going to do is take a star, bring all that hair up, and see if there's any hair that's left over on top. If there's long hairs or hairs that don't quite match up, you can point cut them gently so that they all sit together. You want to do this because as your client moves her hair, or if they put their hair up, you want to make sure that it just comes to a nice space on top and everything is connected when it sits down. Okay, so let's go into the hands-on portion now. So before we get started, I just would like to review the 5 pillars of the haircut before we start with this haircut, as it's essential for what we're doing. So we must analyze the density of anyone who is going to be receiving this haircut because it is essential for the haircut to work properly. So we want to make sure that we're working with someone with sparse or normal to thick hair. for this. Also, our texture of our hair comes into play when we are deciding upon who the shag will be appropriate for. So wave pattern, type of curl. This is not a good haircut for stick straight hair, hence we do want some texture in the shag haircut when it's finished. Having very straight hair makes it difficult for this particular haircut to show off the beauty of it. And then also anywhere from medium to coarse texture is completely appropriate, but the length is also essential to make sure that the shag looks like a shag. This is a longish below shoulder or at shoulder haircut with the shortest lengths in the front working between the cheekbone and the lip. So let's get started with our shag. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to find the natural fall of the haircut and cut the perimeter length. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comb all the hair as it would naturally fall from the high point of the head. And to find that high point of the head, I'm going to make sure that my client's head is upright and sitting in a natural position as they would hold it. And I'm going to use my comb and balance that comb on top of the head. Where it pivots is the high point. All the hair in front of that high point falls forward, all the hair behind that falls backward, and such to the side. Once I establish my natural fall, I can go in and cut the perimeter length. Yes, the hair is going to be in your client's eyes for a minute. You can let them know that that's going to be happening and it should be just fine. So let's raise my mannequin head. And you want to be at eye level when you're cutting. So if I was in the salon, it's possible I would be using a stool to do this. My mannequin head, the length on it is fairly close to where I want it. So I'm not actually going to take a lot of length off. I'm just going to establish a new perimeter line. So we're going to start in the back of the head, and I'm going to work with a center panel. And I'm going to comb the hair straight down in natural fall and comb the hair out of the way that I'm not working with. So we'll give it one comb with the small teeth, one comb with the large teeth, and then cut that perimeter line. Because this is a textured haircut, I am going to use a point cutting technique here. So we're going to cut small V's in the bottom of the hair. And that will be my guide. So I'm going to work to one side. I'm going to move my mannequin head slightly so that I'm in front of the section that I'm working with. Make sure she's upright. Comb the next section straight down from natural fall and use my previous section as my guide. Again, I'm not taking too much hair off here, so this is more just establishing a new perimeter. We're going to turn her the other direction. I find that moving back and forth as I'm cutting helps me maintain consistency with my line. And I'm going to move over to the side by the ear, comb this hair straight down. My tension is not too tight. It's a little bit loose. I have enough to control the hair, but I'm not pulling on the hair. I'm going to comb this last section in front to see if there's anything to remove. And in fact, there's just one small corner. I'm going to move my head back to the other side now, and we'll comb this section on the side straight down using my cut guide from the back, and then again combing that section in the front just to make sure if there's any points to take off, and there's not. So before I move on, I'm going to comb all of the hair straight down and double check that my perimeter lengths are in fact equal. So we're going to move on. The next step we're going to do is section the entire mannequin head so that we have a roadmap to know where we're going. So I'm going to let her down a bit. And so the first thing I'm going to do is to section the head front to back using that high point of the head. I'm going to take my comb and do a straight line part down the back of the head, and we'll separate right at the center. I'm going to turn that head to the front and do another straight line part down the center of the head in the front. It's not imperative that your client is wearing a middle part. This is for sectioning purposes. Second thing I'm going to do is from that same starting point on top of the head, the high point, I'm going to section the head from front to back, right down to just behind the ear. At this point, you should start to see 4 sections appearing in the mannequin head, the traditional 4 quadrants that we talk about. I'm going to spin this head again, and now I'm going to do the other side. Make sure your client's head is straight up and down, or your parting will be off. And I'm going to take that part from the high point to just behind the ear in the same way that I did this side opposite. Now we have 4 sections. Okay, I'm going to take these sections and I'm going to further break them down. The first one I'm going to do is create my side section and top section where the recession of the hair is. I'm going to take that point and take a straight horizontal section, which will create my top and front along with my side section. This is really the easiest way to break the mannequin head down or break your client's hair sections down. It just moves a lot more fluid this way. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Let's take a look at that front section. Again, just so we remember that we're working with the recession, we're taking a horizontal section back. I'm going to position her again so that I can be in front of my section. It's much easier to keep your section clean and on target if you're standing in front of the section that you're working with. This is a necessary step within cutting hair, so we have a roadmap to where we're going. And what we're doing is we're breaking the mannequin head down or the client's hair down into the 12 planes of the head so we understand where each plane is and each plane that we're working with while we're cutting the hair. This makes the haircut more consistent and replicatable. And so we're going to do the same thing in the back, and we're going to establish our crown section, parietal section, and nape. So I'm going to take my starting point is going to be right where I left off on the side, and I'm going to connect this horizontally to the center of the back of the head. Again, for consistency, it's best to stand right in front of your section as you're doing this. Tendency to elevate or decline in the way you're sectioning can be very easy to happen if you're not in front of your section. And then we can simply connect the dots from the center, back, bottom of the crown to where we've established our side section. I find it very easy to control the hair and section when we focus on the very edge of our comb, lying it flat on the mannequin head and putting our finger in the point where we want to connect the dots. And then the last two sections that we have are going to be the parietal sections and nape. And as soon as we section out the parietal, we will have the nape section. So that's going to be found by connecting the area at the top of the ear, and then we can use our comb in the back. We can even feel where that occipital bone is and where that comb leaves the head or pivots. That's where we're going to start our nape and parietal connection. So that gives us our last sections. If I was doing this in a salon, I would definitely be sitting in a position or standing in a position where I could be a little bit more in front of my section. So I am going to scoot down just to make sure that my section is clean and horizontal. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side, connecting that top of the ear to the top of the nape. And we want to make sure that our sections are at the same height and clean. And that's our nape section. So this gives us the planes of the head that we'll be working with. Our roadmap to the shag. So to start this, now that we've created our sections and established where the planes of the head are, we're going to move the position of the mannequin head so that I'm facing her. We're actually starting this haircut in the front, at the front hairline, working with both the front and top sections first. I'm going to get the hair out of the way from the crown so that it's not interrupting my work. And we're going to be working with these two sections in the front, right here. I'm going to take one of my clips and now use it to control the hair in the nape and make sure that it is also out of my way as I'm cutting. So let's establish our guide. We're going to take our first section right at the front, and we can use the sections behind it as support to move the hair out of our way. And so I'm working with these two sections right in the front on either side of the head. We want to establish where we want the haircut to start in the bang length in the front. Technically, this doesn't have a specific bang separation. It is part of the whole haircut, but we do need to make sure that we cut it at least in this cheekbone area between cheek and lip at the longest. If you cut below that, it begins to look more like a long layered haircut, and the shape of the shag is established with this front section. So I'm going to work with the cheekbone area length in the front. And when I'm establishing this, because I'm working with some sort of texture in the hair, as we've talked about in the 5 pillars, it is important to understand that this will shrink with your client's hair because there's texture in it when it's dry. So when you're establishing this length, do give it some encouragement to see where that wave is going so that we can get an idea that if I cut the hair here, I'm not having too much tension in the hair where it will spring above and beyond where I actually want it. So I'm going to encourage that wave, push that in a bit, and then just get an idea that if I'm going to cut around the cheekbone, it's actually stretched out a little bit more toward the lip. So that allows me to be safe and know that where I'm going with this haircut is where I've actually established I want to go. I'm just going to take a small section in the front to make this even a little bit easier for myself, right in here, which lands just about at the tip of her nose. And I'm going to go ahead and cut that. So now we have our starting guide right at that cheekbone. I'm going to take my first section here, and we're going to elevate horizontally out of the head. Now the elevation is going to increase as we cut, so I'm going to reduce the height of my mannequin head or my client so that I'm able to lift my arms appropriately and get that elevation. So I'm going to go right at that center section, and I'm going to hold the hair horizontally straight toward me. I'm standing in front of my section, and I'm going to keep my fingers parallel to the head and cut. I'm continuing to use medium deep point cutting here so that my edges are not perfectly blunt. It works well with the texture in the hair. Take this next section, I'm giving a comb on top, I'm giving a comb underneath, staying parallel and straight to my section, and I'm giving a nice medium point cut. Now we've established this front section. I check my length. Okay, next section. Another horizontal section that's going to be slightly elevated from the previous one. So we'll take that horizontal to the same spot on both sides. Starting in the center, we're going to elevate this section slightly higher than the first. And if you find it's too big to hold in your hands, you can separate that into two, maintaining your body position and staying parallel to your section and straight to the front of the head. And we're going to point cut right to the guide. So if you can, keep your fingers at the elevation that they were before you come in and pick up the hair underneath it using rolling hands, so that you can roll that hair into the same elevation that you have established. And we'll go ahead and cut with that same point cut. I'm going to try to keep my hands there and use rolling hands again to maintain that elevation, just lifting that hair to the same elevation, standing in front of my section, square with the front of the head, and using rolling hands again to maintain that elevation. Be very careful not to over direct that hair into what you're doing. You want to keep a straight line, staying square with the front of the head. And I'm going to comb that hair down, take a look at my corners to make sure that they are even. And what I can see right now is that this one has a little bit more length on it, and that's partially because the section on this side is further because of the way the mannequin head is shaped. So I'm going to be conscious of that as I continue to work. I actually may want to take a look at my sectioning right now to make sure it's on target. And I'm going to reduce the amount of hair that I'm working with on this side. It's really important to continuously analyze what you're doing as you're doing it, because we move, we change, and things happen on the head that we're working with. We make sure we're going to stay consistent with what we're doing and make changes as you're going as needed. So next section, same horizontal sectioning as the previous one, mirroring that on the other side. And now we're going to increase our elevation a little bit more than what we had previously. So you can see the hair is starting to move up in elevation. Taking the hair all the way to the guide, making sure I can see my guide, and I'm doing a medium point cut. I did need to drop that section to collect my next section. I was not able to use rolling hands there, so I'm going to recreate that elevation before I cut, making sure that I'm standing square to the front of my mannequin head. Point cut. Right, before I go on, I'm going to comb my section down. You should start to see somewhat of a curve because we're working on a round surface. We're going to get a curvature in the perimeter line that we have. My sections are on, about the same length, so I'm going to keep going. Depending on the density of the hair, you may have 1 or 2 sections left. I see enough hair here to take 2 sections, go back to the center, take a piece of my previous guide and the new section, elevating it just a little bit further than the previous time. Again, standing in front of my mannequin head and keeping my fingers parallel to my section. I have to recreate my elevation here, and do be careful that you are not picking up hair from another section. Continue that curve, make sure I'm on point. This hair, you see that long piece right there? That was pulled out of my side section. So I want to make sure that, again, that I'm paying attention to what I'm doing as I'm doing it so I don't cut hair that doesn't belong. I'm going to reestablish that section, re-elevate, and then recut that corner. It's really important as you're cutting, if you need to go in and do something again that you did it in exactly the same way you did the rest of the sections, or you'll have inconsistencies within your haircut. So I'm going to take that center part, and I'm on my last section right now. I'm going to take a piece of my previous and my new section, my last section on top, and create just a bit more elevation than I did the first time. You can comb on top to smooth, but make sure that you comb underneath to encourage the elevation of this section. Point cut that, and we'll take our next and last section in this top. Bring the hair back to the elevation I was cutting with the previous side, finding my guide, staying parallel to the head, and point cutting. Can use rolling hands there, it's recommended, just because you will be able to maintain your elevation better. So let's take the final corners of the hair, bring them down forward, and make sure that we're on the same track, and we are. You can also comb this section down and see the curvature that is created. Okay, next step will be moving on to the sides of the haircut. So I'm going to unclip this section and move the hair that's in my way so I can stay consistent. And with the side, we're now connecting what we've done on the top and the front into what we have in the back at the very nape of the hair as our established length. We're going to use a slide cutting motion that includes some talking of the shear. So as we're moving, we'll be moving our thumb as we're working through. It is not a traditional comb your section, stabilize, and cut. It is a movement with hair and the shear as you're going. So I'm going to use my perimeter guide in the back and my established length in the front, and I'm going to connect those 2 points as I cut the hair back. I'm going to take the whole side section in my hand as I do this. If the hair has a lot of density, a lot of texture, and you need to break this into 2 sections, you can do that. It is preferable to try to take the whole section, side section in as one, as we are doing a less structured way of cutting this section. So I'm combing the hair down and slightly forward. My guide is down here. My guide is up here. I'm going to insert my shear. I'm standing behind my section, and I'm going to cut back as I talk and slide. So what we have happen is this nice backward movement in the front that connects down to the length in the back. And do the same thing on the other side. This is not a place where you want to do a lot of cross-checking. The hair needs to have some sort of differential in the way the lengths are. So if you start to establish too much perfection in the way it's structured, you'll lose the beauty of the shag. So we'll move to the other side, take my side section out, comb that hair straight down in natural fall, find my established back section for my guide. And as you move side sections, you're going to be cutting in an opposite direction. So the way you hold your shear is going to change slightly. As I was cutting from behind, now I'm going to be cutting in front. And I still want to make sure that I comb this section down and slightly forward with an eye on the back guide and the front guide. So you can see I do have some tension to hold the hair straight. Let's see where that hair starts, right in here. I am going to tilt, my palm should be facing the head. This way your knuckles are going to get in the way and you're not going to be able to stay consistent with the way you're cutting. So you do need to flip your shear. There's my starting point. And my scissors are parallel to the hair strand. And I'm talking and sliding at the same time. And we get this backward movement of the hair again into the back. So the way we want to check this is really just to do a visual check. Are my lengths the same? If I shake the hair, you can see the movement and the texture in the hair already as it moves around. Is the hair moving at the same spots? Does the texture look similar? Are the lengths falling in the same spots? And in fact, they are, so we're good to go on that. Don't dig into this and cross-check once again. Okay, now that we've established the front and the sides and the perimeter length, we're going to work in the crown and the top and the back. So the parietal is going to be the last section we cut. So I'm going to unclip the crown and then determine my guide length based upon the previous length on the top that we cut in the front. So this is going to establish my guide in the crown. You can see the importance of clips, that we need to have these sections separated. So I'm going to take my very little piece of my top section here in the crown, and a very piece of my top section I previously cut, and that's going to establish my guide. So I'm going to hold this little guy up, straight up out of the head, and point cut that to establish my guide. I'm going to continue to work in horizontal sections, almost mirroring what we did in the front. Take my first section, and I'm going to comb this section straight up from the head, and I'm going to use my shears and point cut this to establish my first guide. I'm going to take a horizontal section on the other side now and mirror that. Straight up, I'm standing square to the back of the head of the mannequin. Fingers are parallel to the section, slightly overlapping, and this is our new guide. In the front, we started at the front hairline, and we elevated as we moved up. In the crown, we're going to reduce the elevation as we move down. So it's going to be an opposite but same movement. So I'm going to take my next section, horizontal again. I'm going to comb the hair slightly toward me. So I'm reducing the elevation. Instead of combing the hair straight up, I'm going to comb the hair slightly back toward me. Notice I've established my elevation. I've combed the hair on top to push down, and then I'm recombing underneath to maintain that elevation. standing square to the back of the head using my point cut, and I'm cutting that second section. I'm going to mirror this on the other side. I do need to be in front of my section as I'm cutting. So I'm going to comb this hair again, straight up first, and then reduce that elevation slightly and comb from underneath to maintain. Medium point cut and done. Before I move on, I want to look at the length of the corners on each side to make sure that I am on target and I can hold them straight up. And in fact, we're good. Okay, I have two more sections here. I'm going to do a horizontal section again, taking a piece of the hair I previously cut and slightly reducing the elevation once again. Square to the back of the head, medium point cut, and mirroring that on the other side of the mannequin head. My guide, piece of my previous section, slightly lowered elevation, and point cut. Again, just a reminder, it's really important not to pull the corners of the hair in toward the center as you're cutting. You want to keep this very straight and parallel toward the back. If you bring those corners in, it will gradually create length in the opposite direction. All right, last section, piece of my previous, and now my new guide, and I'm dropping that elevation even a little bit more. We are still elevated at about a 45-degree angle at this point from the head, and I'm combing up underneath to maintain that elevation as I cut. Standing in the center and doing that final section. I'm not working with this hair, so I want it out of my way. Okay, final section, elevate that at about that 45-degree angle, still staying horizontal, and point cutting. All right, let's take a look. Is my line straight? Yes. Are my corners on target? Yes. So I am good to move on to the parietal section. So this is going to be our final section. In order to cut this, we need to move this front and side out of the way so that we don't cut into it. If it's easier for you and cleaner, which it is for me, I will just take a clip to hold that hair out of the way. And I'm going to use the bottom of the crown as my guide section for my parietal. So I'm going to take one section at the bottom of that crown, and that's what I'm going to use as my guide. The rest of the hair I want out of the way. Now, when I cut this parietal, there's two things I have to take into consideration. First of all, not to cut into the length in the actual perimeter of the shag, or we're going to lose density down here, which will make it look very wispy. And based upon the hair texture that you're working with, if it's too wispy, it will not have the full shape that a shag should have. If there's too much hair and it looks too chunky, that will also be an issue. There's detailing that can be done after the haircut, which I would recommend as a safety net to do that instead of cutting too much hair out of the right away. So I'm going to use my guide. If I cut the bottom of this section to the guide that I have here, I want to determine if the nape is going to need cutting. And right now I can see it's just about matching up if I keep all of this parietal section at the same elevation as the bottom section of my crown. So I know that I can take all of this parietal and bring it right up to this bottom section of the crown, and I will preserve all the length in my nape, which is exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to section and clip off the nape just so that I don't cut into it. Here's my guide from the crown. I'm going to take my first horizontal section within the parietal plane and comb it up into the bottom of the crown section. That's my guide, using the same elevation. And so I'm combing from underneath, standing in the center square, and point cutting that first section. I can use rolling hands because I have stabilized my guide and my section. So I'm going to mimic the same thing on the other side. Let's let that parietal section down. Standing in the back of the head, let's comb this section up to match our elevation and point cut. If you have really fine hair or a low amount of density, it's possible you could take this entire parietal section and cut it all at once. The mannequin head has enough density in her hair where I want to break this down to a few sections. So I'm combing the hair up into the same elevation. I'm not reducing my elevation at this point. Combing it straight up. And remember, if I reduce my elevation, it's possible I will cut into my perimeter line, and I don't want to do that in the nape. Okay, another section on the other side, mirroring what I just did. Get my elevation. Now there's too much hair here for me to totally do rolling hands, but I'll use my fingers to kind of keep it up in the same elevation. Okay, I'm at the bottom of the parietal plane, and now I'm going to comb the rest of the parietal up into the elevation that I cut all the previous sections. So like there's a little tangle in this mannequin head. If there's a tangle in your hair you're working with, get it smooth, elevate up, horizontal, square at the back of the head, point cut that last section. And I'm going to finish my last section, combing that whole parietal plane up into the elevation I need it, square at the back of the head, and point cut. Again, I'm combing underneath the hair to really elevate and encourage that elevation. All right, so I'm going to check my corners, bring it to the center back. Are they on target? Yes, they are. And I'm going to release the nape. So let's see what we have, if there's any connection pieces. Actually, I'm going to release all of these sections and comb this haircut out so we can see if there's any areas that need adjustments. You can see we create this concave shape here, this crown, and so you get this nice rounded and then coming in area with the shape. I'm going to take a vertical section right down the center back, and I'm just going to look and see where my nape plane and parietal plane connect. If there's any hair that's disconnected, I want to just have an idea if I need to do any adjustments there. And you can see there's just a small tail. So I'm just going to change my finger angle and just work that corner off so that there's no steps in the haircut. I'm going to take another vertical section. This is very loose. This is not a cross-checking situation. I'm not looking for exceptional anything here. I'm just making sure that there's no long tails hanging out up the back. And I don't even see any on that side, so I'm not going to cut anything. Remember, it's as important to leave hair on the head as it is to cut it off, and knowing when to do that is also extremely, extremely important. So we have a small tail on the edge here. I'm just going to gradually cut that off and make sure that everything else connects, and it does. Okay, enough with the comb. Let's use the hands. Let's scrunch this texture up a little bit, shake up the hair a little bit. One thing about when you're doing a lot of freehand cutting or sliding or moving the hair, it's necessary to see where the texture is going to move and how that shape is going to show up in the haircut. Not just combing it all straight, because this is not, haircut's not going to be worn all straight. So let's move it around, see if anything looks like it's out of place visually. You know, this is why you need texture in this haircut, right? Because you want to be able to move the hair in a way that it suits the shape. And that's really the biggest way I would be checking this haircut. So there's the shag.